Hello everyone, and welcome to the second meetup of this year's Angular Spring Camp series. I'm Krzysztof Skorupka, and I will be your host for today's event, and I'm here on behalf of the entire Angular Love team, the folks who put these events together for you. In case this is your first time joining us, our camps includes 3 meetups, each featuring talks from some of the best industry experts. So there is already one event behind us. Today, it is the middle stop on the journey, and there is still one more event awaiting us in June. So as always, we are broadcasting live from Warsaw, Poland. And be sure to jump into the chat, say hi, and drop your location, as we are really curious to know where you are joining us from. And at this point, I would also like to thank our sponsor, House of Angular, a software agency specializing in all things Angular. So if you've got any challenges or needs around Angular development, don't hesitate, you know who to call. And you'd also like to extend our gratitude to our community partners, Angular Athens, Angular France, Frontend Nation, and Decoded Frontend. Thank you for always supporting us. All right, so I guess at this point, it's time to take a look at our agenda. We have lined up 3 amazing talks today for you. So Mateusz Stefańczyk will kick things off with what's new in Angular 20. Then Fanis Prodromou will dive into Angular signals, a look under the hood and beyond. And finally, Enea Jahollari will share the missing intro of deferred block. As usually, after each segment, there will be a Q&A session, so be sure to ask your questions in the chat, share your thoughts, basically interact with each other throughout the whole event. We would love to hear from you. So without further delay, let me introduce our first speaker, Mateusz Stefańczyk. And Mateusz is not only a passionate Angular developer, but he's also a key contributor here in Angular Love. He's also part of the Angular Love core team, the team who's responsible for preparing these events for you. And in case you don't know this yet, I'm really happy to share with you that actually Matt has recently achieved a big thing, which is he became a Google developer expert. So welcome, Matt. How are you doing today?
Hello, nice to see you, Chris. Hello, everyone. I'm fine, rather fine. Just sent off the work. Right now, time to do some talk for the community at our meetup. I am always happy to see you. We don't have chance right now to see it so often, so I am constantly smiling, seeing you, like introduction and so on. So it's all fine. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm also doing great, and really nice to hear that. I'm also really happy. So again, congrats, Matt, on becoming a GDE. That's a huge thing, a huge milestone for you. So regarding this one, maybe you would like to share some insights with us, you know, how the process looks like, because I believe many people ask about this stuff. So maybe you would like to share something with us. How did it look for you?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question, because also on my LinkedIn post, in the comments, people have been asking me what's the journey, what do they need to do. So I will try to narrow it down for you, explain a little bit. So there is no specific like threshold or metrics, what exactly you need to do to become the GDE. There's like a few areas you need to be proactive within, and this is for like contributing to open source is kind of the one way where you contribute to open source projects related with the Angular. You are really proactive here. That's the one way to show off your skills and devotion for the Angular community. And 2 other ways are very similar to each other. So one is like being kind of the active person, some kind of influencer, maybe let's say on the LinkedIn, Twitter, by sharing with community some latest news, insights from the Angular, educating here about the Angular, giving some tips and tricks and so on. And the other way is also very close, like attending the conferences, organizing the conferences, creating some kind of the ebooks and so on for the community. So everything what commits to growing Angular, growing people around the Angular is the good point, and just it's valuable in terms of becoming the GDE. The other thing you need to have is the kind person who actually is the GDE and will recommend you to Angular team that this person is valuable to become the GDE. For me, that person was Fanis, so I am very thankful for him. So he recommended me, and then I need to fulfill some specific form regarding my activity in the Angular community for the last year. And when I have been done it, it was reviewed by someone from the Google. Then they approved this as a valuable impact and activity in terms of the Angular community. So then I have an invite for the interview. And after this interview, they finally decide whether you became the GD or not. So pretty long journey, I would say, because you need to actively build around the community for about 1 year, then go through the entire process, and you will know whether you pass or not, right? So that's how it looks like.
Yeah. So thank you for this detailed description.
Yeah, I was trying to be as detailed as possible.
Yeah, that's great. And normally, probably at this point, I would ask you about your favorite features from the Angular 20, but since this is exactly the topic of your today's talk, so we will not spoil it. So let's get straight to your presentation. And I believe this is your first time presenting as a GDE. So
yeah,
welcome on the stage, Matt.
The pressure is high right now. Thank you, Chris. Okay, so let me select my slides. Okay, so as Chris already said and introduced me, I am Mateusz Stefańczyk, and on a daily basis, I work as Angular team leader in the House of Angular. And today we're gonna talk about the Angular 20 and what's new here. And before I even dive into the presentation, I have to calm you a little bit down, because this version specifically is not so rich in terms of the extra features we used to over the recent releases, where each release contains really something huge for Angular resilience, things like the signal, resources, new control flow, SSR improvement, hydration, and so on. There was like plenty of new features. Each of them was breaking. So no, this version probably wouldn't be like that if Angular team is not hiding anything special in front of us. Then they mainly focus on some developer experience improvement, on stabilizing what's already have been done so far, because there was like a lot of work done in the recent releases. They need to stabilize it right now, polish everything what have been done to make the next step in the creating some extra new features for us. So before I just dive to the presentation, I would like to share with you some awesome open source project which can give us an insight how this process of polishing, stabilizing the stuff is going on. It's built by the community, and it's, let me share the screen maybe without talking. So this is an awesome website, Angular courses/Canus, where you can see what is the status of the Angular packages. So we can see there at the very top of the page a pretty nice and descriptive legend, where we can see what the particular color means, whether the package is experimental, developer preview, stable, deprecated, or even removed. And if we scroll down, we can select what time span of the particular features changes, between which version changes we want to observe. So I pre-selected already before the presentation version 19, but you can even track how the particular package has been changing from version 13. So it's going even a few years back. You also can like research your package you are specifically interested in. I just type resource or res to see what is the status of the resource API. So right now I will focus on the changes between version 19 and 20 to show you what actually have been polished and make the stable one. So if we scroll down, we can see that the signal effect, which is already a huge thing because effect is probably one of the last signal-related stuff which were introduced for us pretty early. Wasn't stable so far. So in the version 20, we can expect it to become the stable. Also, with i18n support will become stable. Some huge things are very important packages in terms of the SSR becoming stable. There is like still a lot of things to do, but already 3 of them will become stable in the upcoming version. Also 2 new hooks like after every render, after next render will become stable. What is pretty important probably for all kinds of the projects which has been developed in Angular in the recent years, RxJS interrupt became stable because most of us have been working on observables. And if we want to migrate to a new way of reactivity, we need to use these interrupts, or just we will need to rewrite entire, I don't know, reactivity to the signals somewhere in the services. What is even for some project not possible right now due to time cost and so on. So it's great that these 2 functions actually became stable already. And also something I am very happy about is with incremental hydration. That's the great feature for SSR, and it also will be stable in this version. linkedSignal, which I believe a lot of us already are using on production maybe, will become stable. But also what is pretty interesting, that all structural directives, maybe not all of them, but those most famous for us like ngIf, ngFor, ngSwitch, they will become deprecated. And right now, whenever we will be utilizing them in our project, we will be getting kind of the notification or warning about this one. So I strongly encourage you to visit this website and check what is stable, what is developer preview. Even if you will have some idea to use something on the production already, you can go there and check what is the status of the package, whether you should it on the production or maybe you should wait a little bit because in the upcoming version it will be finally stable, so maybe it's worth to wait. And this project is created by Jerome Grignon, and I strongly encourage you to follow his work on the LinkedIn, Twitter. He's a really passionate person regarding the Angular. He created this great open source project. He's attending and organizing some conferences also on daily basis. He shared a lot of insightful information about the Angular. And it's just a worth person to follow if you want to be up to date with Angular and cool stuff like that, which I shared with you. Okay, so now I will go back to my presentation. So I showed you that kind of the work which might not be visible has been done and needed to be done to stabilize what we have been using for weeks, months even. But there will be also new stuff, new cool stuff in the Angular. It's not like there will be nothing. So there will be new API for ng component outlet, which we widely use for dynamically creating the components. So far, we always have to do it manually by destroying the container, recreating the component, manually binding the inputs, destroying component, and so on. Right now, we will have more declarative way of doing this one. So whenever we use ng component outlet, we can define which component should be rendered here dynamically. Whenever my component wouldn't be null, it will be rendered. We can pass as a parameters what kind of the input it accepts, what kind of the content nodes it accepts. So if it has some kind of the content projection within itself, we have a possibility to pass it as a parameter. We can pass also an injector and outputs there. Yeah, I will send the link. I will send the link to the person. Sorry, I was reading the question. Right, so there is more declarative, simpler way to dynamically create component without bothering of creating and destroying the container and so on. Everything will happen under the hood. But also, if we prefer this manual way of dynamically creating components, having more control over the process, there will be new improved API of create component method. So it will similarly accept as a first parameter the component, but as a second parameter, we can pass the options. And here we can define the bindings, and using predefined methods like input binding, two-way binding, output binding, we can define here what should be the input value, what should happen after the output emits value, what should and how should two-way data be bind, but also we can dynamically apply directives to our dynamically rendered component. And similarly to components, as a first parameter, we pass the directive that should be applied, and then we do entire binding of the values for this directive, what should be the input, and so on. So here we can see comparison of two new ways, like more declarative way, and here improved manual way of creating dynamic component. Okay, so we also get some asynchronous redirect function. So far, the redirect tool couldn't execute the asynchronous, couldn't resolve the promises observables. Right now, it will be possible. We can return an observable here, which will resolve to URL tree or just the string. And as we can see on my example, I utilize some auth service to verify whether user is authorized. And whenever he is authorized, I can redirect him to the home or login. Also, there is an improvement in HTTP resource. So right now, whenever some signal that HTTP resource depends on change, the request will be performed automatically, right? So as you can see on my example, my HTTP resource depends on a few signals. It depends for the URL param on the market ID. It also depends on the parameters like sort options, search term, but also headers depend on the signal, which is my header. And right now, whenever any of them change, this will be triggered. Also, what is pretty exciting that under the hood, it's utilizing the HTTP client, so we don't have to bother regarding our interceptors and so on, whether they will be triggered. So entire middleware around the HTTP client will work exactly same way. So if we make a request, we have the interceptor. This interceptor will be executed when we utilize HTTP resource to fetch our data. Also, the resource itself has been extended to predefine the default value, and I think it's a valuable option, since if we are using the resource to manage our state, because maybe we have very small component, a small slice of data is needed there, we don't utilize any state management, it's always great to have some default value predefined. So everyone who has been working over the years with any kind of the state management knows that initially we predefine the default values, and then when some actions happen, we override these default values. So same will be for the resource. It will have some kind of the default value, but whenever its value change, it will be override. So far, it was undefined always. Right now, we'll have a possibility to define the default value. This is kind of the change from the Angular 19.2, so somewhere between 19 and 20, but I decided to say about it because my next slide also will follow up to this. So now we have a possibility to utilize template literals in the template. So in the past, whenever we wanted to join our variables properties with some string, we always have to use this plus string, plus value, plus string, and so on. But on the TypeScript side, we always could utilize these literals, string literals, and just use the $sign and execute and bind our properties, create pretty flexible way the strings. Right now, it's also possible in the template. But there is something extra in terms of the template literal. There are template tag literals. And what are the template tag literals? So these are kind of the options which we utilize to execute over our template literals. So as you can see, I have defined the method, which is called greet. And as a method is executed at the template. So we can see that we call this method pretty different when the casual methods, because we put it in front of our template literals, and how it will be called and executed, and what will be the parameters of this method. So as a first parameter of these methods, we'll get the array of the strings. And this array will contain pure strings we are having in our template literals. So for us, it's like hello, comma, good, and exclamation mark. And as a second parameters, we will get the data, second and third, and maybe fourth, depends how many properties we will be utilizing over our template literals. And in our case, it will be name and greetings. So you can see here we have the pure strings, then we have what we actually binding and utilizing across of template literals. And a lot of us might see that it's maybe very similar to the pipe. What is even the use case of this one? First difference between this and pipe is the fact that here we have direct access to all of the component properties. And this kind of the method wouldn't be probably widely used, but there might be a scenario when you would like to manipulate your text based on certain conditions, and you don't want to hard code it in the template directly, for example. Also, it's a great thing for sanitization. So there will be use cases, but probably it wouldn't be so widely and common used. The next small improvement is exponential operator. So far we couldn't perform this kind of the math operations in the template. We always had to use some method or just use the math class directly in the template. Now we easily, using 2 asterisks, can multiply our value by some specific number. The next thing, which is widely used right now on the TypeScript side of our components, but was not possible in the template, is in keyword. So right now we can utilize in keyword to check whether some property exists in scope of our object, and based on that we can display something or hide something. So we can utilize it as a Boolean condition within an if. Also, we can utilize it to bind the classes to our HTML elements. So I think very useful and nice improvement. There is also keep alive support for fetch requests. So this is kind of the feature that might be very useful whenever you want to track some specific analytics. So let's say you want to track from which page or on which page user decided to leave your page application, and track it, send it to the backend to have kind of the overview. Maybe people are getting stuck somewhere during the process of creation, whatever. So right now, whenever people just leaving your website, this request might not finish, but they will already leave and it will be break. So by keep alive true, you will make sure that before they unload and leave the application, this request will be executed and finished. So also very useful feature. Okay, so there is a bunch of the smaller improvements. So there is next step towards zoneless. So right now, whenever we will be creating our application using Angular CLI, it will recommend for us to go directly with zoneless. There is improved type checking support for host binding. So whenever we utilize host binding, the type checking will be much better. we will get the notification about uninvoked track functions. So as I showed you, the structural directive of ng4 will be deprecated, and using the ng update, it will automatically migrate our structural directive to new control flow. But our directives contains, like specifically ng4 contains a lot of track by functions, and these functions will be uninvolved right now, so we'll be notified post migration regarding this one. And also Angular will stop producing ng-reflect attributes, which were indicating about some kind of the Angular bindings on the element, which will decrease the size of the bundled application on the dev mode specifically. What we are still waiting for, because we expected that maybe this version will contain signal forms, another big signal related stuff we are all waiting for. Unfortunately not. Within this version we will not see signal forms, so we still need to wait. I read that this kind of the API being polished and improved right now, so maybe we can expect it in the next version. We will see. The next hot discussion, very warm discussion we had between 19 and 20 was about the selectorless in Angular. It's also not being released within this version. From that, what I saw, it's still being under discussion. You can participate discussion in all kind of the RFCs, not only regarding this feature, but as usual in Angular, there is a RFC where we can participate, share our thoughts, which I strongly encourage you to join these discussions, share your opinion about this approach and how you will see that. And also recently I read that within upcoming weeks, we can expect experimental VyTest support. So this is something what already has been announced that will be in experimental provided for us. So probably matter of weeks. And that's it. So thank you guys for this presentation. So as I said, a lot of work has been done to provide stabilization to the features we already love to make the next step for upcoming great things.
Okay, Matt, thank you very much for your presentation. That was really solid dose of knowledge. And now it's time for our Q&A session. So if you still have some questions, be sure to ask them now. And let me look if there is already, yep, there is already one. I can see how to use template literals with inline templates.
Yeah, that's the good question, yeah, because we define the template using exactly same sign as we using to use the template literal. And I'm going to be extremely honest, I don't know because I didn't test it yet, yeah, so I will need to take a look, but I am completely sure they just cover it somehow, right? So we'll see, but I can't imagine it will not work with the inline templates. I don't know whether you, Chris, maybe have some idea.
I don't know either. This is kind of tricky, as you said, because these backticks are used for both things. Maybe you can escape them somehow. I don't know. We just have to check. All right, so there is another one. I'm not really sure we will be able to answer this one, but maybe do you know something? Are there any news on the updated Angular style guide?
Not sure. I didn't encourage every kind of the news. What I only Minko, sorry, I was reading something. Said that he really is writing like extremely long blog posts. It's about 11 or 12 pages already on his site. So probably there will be a lot of insightful, cool information from his site. I don't know whether he will cover like some Angular style guide. He was like sharing some image of the page, what we think that might be, and so on. Maybe it will be some kind of the updated style guide, but like covering searching stuff for this presentation, I didn't encourage some kind of specific mention regarding the fact that the entire style guide will be updated during this release.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for that. And there is a couple more. So the Angular team, Minko, used a demo to show hydration with SSR with black and white and color components. Maybe this has public access for use in demonstrations. So I'm not sure if you remember that one, Matt, but they indeed used something like that for the demos. Not
I don't
sure.
know whether there is like somewhere. It was. I even was attending a meetup with him, and I had talk on this meetup as well. It was in London when he was like sharing that one. It was like partial hydration, probably, where he specifically has been hydrating based on certain conditions, the specific components, and it had a great visualization when the component not hydrated has been gray, other have been in color already or just became colorful. But whether there is public access to this one, I'm not sure. We'll need to take a look.
Yeah, maybe we can try to find it, and if so, we can publish it on our social media if it's available. All right, so let me get to another one. So any idea if we will be getting to experiment with signal forms in V20?
Not sure whether we will be getting to experiment, but if someone is already interested, probably there is a branch where the signal forms are being developed, and you can access this branch, clone it to your local machine, just install this specific version of Angular and play around with the signal forms. That what I saw some people are already doing and providing the Angular team with valuable feedback, doing it actually this way. So there is a way to play around with the signal forms already.
Yeah, that's right. And we have one more. Is Zone.js optional in V20?
Yeah, that's what I think so, right? If they are just during the creating the new app with Angular 20 in the CLI, just recommending us to go zoneless, I think we can treat it as optional.
Okay, so there is two more, so let it be the last one. So should we absolutely use signal store in Angular 20? What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, that's a very valuable question. And even we each other and with other guys in the house of Angular, we had this talk like whether with the really full support of resources and well granularly defined resources in scope of some file, let's say call it service or whatever we want to call it, whether we still really need some state management library anymore. Because in the past, it was like we could use services with behavior subject, but after some time, it's became mess. But here with resource API, that seems more clear for me, easier to maintain, read, and so on. So I still use the signal store in my project, but I can imagine the project without the signal store. So there is no like something you absolutely don't use signal store or you must use signal store. It's case by case because signal store still have plenty nice features where he can encapsulate everything within single file, single declaration, multiple properties, state management. Right now, I know they are trying to bring, or even in the upcoming version, I was reading about it yesterday, like event-driven Redux-like signal store state management, right? So if some people like to work based on the events or just need to manage them state based on the events, so there is still use case. But I think from version to version, it will be matter of discussion.
Yeah. And that's kind of funny because I feel like we are falling into the same set of questions like we used to do in the past for the global NGRX store, don't you think? Yeah. Like, you know, whether to use it or not. Yeah. So, but this was our progress.
There was global, then was the component store. So maybe we should get rid from the global to component, now to component global to signal store, now maybe to resources. So we are constantly moving, right? And just changing our approach all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. And let it be the last one. Any news about the selectorless?
Yeah, so as I said, it wouldn't be released in this version. This stuff is still under discussion, and Angular team strongly encouraged to take part within an RFC, discuss, share your thoughts, and be proactive in terms of the future of this feature.
All right, so I guess that's it for our Q&A session. So again, Matt, thank you very much for the great presentation, for being with us today, and I hope to see you on the future events. So
yeah, I will be replacing you in the upcoming meetup, so I will be the MC this time. So see you soon, guys. Thank you, Chris, for guesting me today. Have a nice day, everyone, and enjoy your upcoming talks. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye. All right. So before we move on to our next speaker, actually, there was one more question on the chat, and I specifically kept this for now because it really corresponds well with what I want to share with you. So it was the latest version I used was 14, which would be the best way to learn until 20. And I have a great news for you. We have you covered. Do you remember our free ebook, which is called The Ultimate Guide to Angular Evolution? So with Angular 20 just around the corner, we are about to publish a new version of it. And if you don't know it yet, this guide includes a roadmap of changes in each Angular version, and it's highlighting the problem-solving benefits in a kind of a structured format. So, as I said, we are now updating it to include Angular 20 features. It has not been done yet or published yet, but in case you would like to be among the first to learn about Angular 20 from our ebook, I have a good news. We opened a registration for the waitlist, so you will find a link in the chat, and you just can access it and basically be informed once it's already there. And I assure you that's really a good way to get through each and every version of Angular and basically catch up. All right, so that's it. And I believe now it's time to introduce our next speaker, Fanis Prodromou. So Fanis is also a GDE. He runs a YouTube channel called Shots with Profanis and also shares his knowledge via various talks and articles. And what's also important, he's a co-organizer of Angular Athens events. So welcome, Fanis. How are you doing today? We cannot hear you, Fanis. I think you might be muted.
It's so classic to be muted. I was saying thanks a lot for the intro, and I'm doing very, very, very good. And before we start, and if Matt is around, I would like to congratulate him. It's amazing having Matt into the GD family, GD program. It's amazing. Congratulations, Matt.
Yeah, so that's great. And yeah, I have one more question to you, Fanis, before we start. I was basically wondering what your plans are regarding attending conferences or meetups this year in person, like, either as a speaker or attendee. So basically where our community can meet you in person.
Yeah, good question. So my plan, September, I think it will be September. I will attend as a speaker the Tech Stack, which will be North Macedonia. And as an attendee, most probably NG Poland. Most probably NG Rome. And I think that was it. And I don't think that I will attend something else. And then some local meetups, perhaps, here in Greece.
Yep. All right, that's great. So I guess we can get straight to the presentation. So the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. So hello, everybody again. So like Chris what he said, my name is Fanis Prodromou. This is my card. Let me introduce myself. I'm a Google developer expert for Angular, senior Angular developer at the company ASI. co-organizer of the Angular Athens meetup here in Greece, and an Angular content creator. And I really like the Angular Love blogspot, where I spend and write my articles there. So today's talk is about Angular signals, and we will have a look under the hood and beyond. And I would like to start with this kind of thing. Angular signals is the new reactivity system. But you already know that, right? That improves. So let's see what kind of improvements we have. Improvements into the developer experience, user experience, and performance. Let's now see a bit more details about every pillar. On the developer experience, we have a bunch of new APIs to use already, and these are the signal inputs, model input, signal queries, the effect. After render effect, I really like that, and I have a very cool article into the Angular Love. You can go there and check it out. Commuted, linkedSignal, and the resourceApi. And into this talk, we will mainly focus into the linkedSignal and resourceApi. And we also have improvements into the user experience. And I know that you might be thinking, how come a framework changes something into the user experience? Well, this is happening not directly, but I can say indirectly, let's say. And we have improvements into the user experience because we have now more fine-grained change detection. And this leads to have a glitch-free rendering, which of course improves the user experience. And now, how about the performance? With signals, we can run a zoneless application. Don't get me wrong, Zone.js is amazing, is magic, or used to be amazing. But what it does is that we have Zone.js here, and we also have the change detection system, but it triggers that many times the change detection. And of course, this is not that great. And we need to keep, of course, the change detection mechanism, but with another way. And since we have now signals, we have more fine-grained change detection, which leads to have fewer change detection cycles, which means that we have better performance. And now I would like to focus into this component tree. We have components from 1, 2, 3, 4, up to component 13. And as you can see into the component 2 and component 30, I have this kind of -5, which is just a counter that will be increased every time we click the component 13. And I would like to observe 3 different things. What would be the behavior of our application if we have a default change detection and observable, and on push change detection and observable, and then on push change detection, but this time using signals. Let's start with the very first one. And as you can see, whenever we're clicking the component 13, we have a new color on every component. New color means new change detection. And you can imagine that would have been, this is not that nice, especially for enterprise applications. But of course, we can solve that. And we already know how to solve this, and we can use on push. And this time, what we can see is that we're clicking the component 13, and only the ancestors of that component are marked as dirty and change detected, which is much better, but still, why do we have to change detect the components, the ancestors of that component, since we do not have something there to re-render? And then we have the signals, where, as you can see, whenever I'm clicking the component 13, we are change detect only the component 13 and component 2, because we have something to re-render. And of course, this is much, much better in terms of performance. But how are we achieving that? Behind the scenes, there is a graph. So let's say that we would like now to create a very small producer, a producer that produces something for us, produces a value. Const counter equals signal with a default value of 0. Nice. So this corresponds to the very first bullet point into our graph. So we'll have this there, and now it's time to consume this one. So how can we consume? Well, what we can do is into our HTML, we'll have the counter, and we're using the parentheses. The parentheses there is magic. What it does apply a logic. It applies a connection between the producer and the consumer. Give me just a sec. And now the producer is aware of the consumer. The producer is aware of the consumer is aware of the producer. And this thing is amazing because now, if for any reason the consumer goes out of scope or being garbage collected, we do not have to go there and explicitly kill this kind of connection, which means that we do not have any memory leak. This will happen automatically for us. And the graph will continue to grow for as many signals we use, even with a commuted, or like I said, the graph will continue to grow. And now we have a more fine-grained change detection, and Angular knows how the data flows, which is an amazing one. And someone would say, is this how we have that great performance? Well, yes and no. We also have the so-called pull-push, which is an amazing algorithm, and I will show you how this actually works. Let's assume that we will have two different signals. We have the first one, which is const is valid signal true, and we have the second one, which is signal profanis. Okay? Into an effect, we would like to have a condition and check if this valid equals to true. If this is true, then we would like to console log the username. No more than that, a simple thing. But please note that into the effect, we have two different signals. And now, what I would like to do is to observe what would happen if we change the is valid from true to false, and then the username from profanis to profanis2. So let's do that in action. On the right side, we can see the producers, and on the left side, we can see the consumers. Now, let's change the is valid from true to false. And whenever we're doing that, what is great with this one is that the producer sends a push notification, just a notification, not the actual value, just a notification, like a poke. Something like, hey, dude, you know what? Something got changed in my side. Okay, so the consumer received the notification. And now let's do the same thing with the username. We change the value from profanis to profanis2, and we do the same thing. We send a push notification, just a push notification, not the value. And now it's time to go into the effect and check the actual value. And you know what? We know that the is valid knows that it has a value because previously received a notification, and goes there and pulls the value and checks that, and the value is false, which means that we can terminate the condition. And the username will never be executed in this condition, and that's why we're saying that the signals are lazy, will be evaluated when they have to be evaluated. So let's now continue this one and see another example. Into the effect, I have the console log and I have the is valid and username, two things into the same console log. And let's do now the same thing, but before we continue, the console log here will run only once, only once. If we think that for a while, using an RxJS semantics, we will think that the console log will run 2 times. But how come now it runs only once? Let's see. We have the is valid and we're doing the same thing. The producer sends a push notification to the effect, just a notification, no more than that. And now it's time the username to do the same thing. It changes a push notification to the effect that something got changed. And now it's time to run the effect. And the effect knows that it has to go there and pull both values. But how come it manages to run only once? If you remember, previously we discussed about a graph, and behind the scenes, of course, we have a graph, and the graph has 2 different dependencies. We have the dependency of is valid and the username, and Angular knows, since we have a more fine-grained flow and knows how the data flows, it knows that we have to go into the is valid, we have to go into the username, pick the values, evaluate, and run actually the console log. And I know that the way that signals work behind the scenes are magic. And I know that you might be thinking, can I have the same magic in HTTP calls? And the answer is yes, but I have first 3 questions for you. Let's start with the very first one, which is a very simple one, okay? How would you handle the situation where you would like to display a loading indicator, just a loading indicator, into your UI? How can you do that? Well, you can do that imperatively by having just a flag and switch that flag from true to false, something like that. Or Sooner or later, you will realize that this is not that dry approach, and you prefer to have something more dry and reusable, and you will go to use something like a custom RxJS operator. And sooner or later, what you have to do is to use this custom RxJS operator every time you use a service, especially whenever you have to have an interaction with HTTP. And please note that this is more like a pseudocode. I'm just sharing an idea. And then what you can do with this kind of thing, perhaps you can have if loading state dot is loading, something like that. Okay, so this is the first question. Let's go to the second question. How about now, if you have a failure response from the HTTP and you would like, of course, to inform the user that something went wrong, how can you do that? Same thing, you can go and do that imperatively by holding a flag has error from false, mark that to true, something like that. But of course, sooner or later, same story, you realize that this is not a dry, and you would prefer to make that more declarative. And you can utilize the same custom RxJS operator. And of course, you can use that into your services. Awesome. And how can you use that into your UI? If loading state dot has error. Amazing. And this works just great. But this is a tailor-made solution, all right? Tailor-made solution, which means that someone from your team, a newcomer to your team, sooner or later will have this kind of compilation error, and the newcomer will realize, oh yeah, I have to ask someone else to instruct me of how to do that. And the third question is the following. How about if you're going to have reactive HTTP calls, dynamic HTTP calls? And what I mean with this is the following. Let's assume that you have no more like a type ahead component. And the input feed could be bound with a signal string or like a form control or whatever. And what I would like to do is that whenever we are typing, whenever we have a keystroke, would like to invoke some HTTP calls. And in this case, I have P, I, Z, and I have 3 different HTTP calls. And someone could say, wait a minute, wouldn't it be better here to cancel the 2 previous HTTP calls? Yes, that would be great, and we'll see that in a second. But before we go there, how can we achieve that with signals? Someone would ask, can we do that using an effect? Well, no. And the reason is that signals are designed to handle a synchronous state, not a synchronous state. It's managed to handle synchronous one. And the effect, same thing, is not designed to handle a synchronous state and can have unexpected behavior. Let me give you an example. Let's assume that we would like to make a request at time 0 and at time 1. At time 0, we are requesting for triangle, and that response will last something for 500 milliseconds. Nice. In between, the user changed their mind and now would like to request circle instead of triangle. And sometimes the HTTP response in terms of time is unpredictable, and that response will last only for 100 milliseconds. And of course, the user will get back a nice circle, which is amazing. This is, after all, what the user requested, right? But after a period of time, the user will get back the previous one, the unfinished HTTP call, which is the triangle. And that would be the undesired state, and this is a wrong thing to have. So we have the synchronous state, which is from one side, which we have from the signals, and on the other side, we have the asynchronous, which is the HTTP call. And we need now somehow to bridge them together. How can we achieve that? How about if we grab the HTTP, which is the asynchronous one, and create a structure that will always have something for us, will always have values. And what I mean, this kind of structure could be the isLoading, could be the error, and the error could be null undefined or the actual HTTP error response, and data where eventually can have the response from HTTP. If we have a structure like that, and especially if we convert them to signals so that they contribute to the signal graph that we saw previously, that would be amazing. And let's now talk about the HTTP resource. The HTTP resource makes a reactive HTTP request and exposes the request status, the thing that we saw previously. We have the loading, we have the error, and the response value. We have the data that we saw previously. And the HTTP resource accepts 2 different arguments. The first one could be string, object, or a function, and the second one can be options. So let's start with the very first thing to see how to use that using a string. We have the HTTP resource, you're using the template literals, and then here we have the signal value, which is a dependency. Like what Matt said previously, whenever the signal value has something new for us, whenever this is marked as dirty, a new HTTP call will be invoked. Nice. So this is how to use the string. Now let's see how to use the object. And as you can see, into the very first property, we have the URL, and I'm using the exact same URL that I had previously. And again, the signal value here is a dependency. But not only the path parameters are dependencies, the query parameters are dependencies as well, which means that if we have any value there, a new HTTP call will be invoked. And now let's see this one, which is very interesting. And before we go there, let me just highlight that the HTTP resource is designed to fetch data, not to mutate data. It's not designed to delete, update, or create. It's designed to fetch data. And you might be asking now, and why do we have there the method? Don't we have to have it always get? Well, no. There are plenty of endpoints out there that they require to have the post as a method to fetch some data. These are something that some companies decided to have for valid reasons, but the Angular team from their side decided to be as much as flexible as they can be regarding the API of the HTTP resource so that they can accumulate and handle different cases. And now let's see the third one, which is the function. But wait a minute. This one seems similar to the string. The only difference here is that we have this kind of arrow function. Why is this a difference? Using an arrow function, it means that we can also have a condition, and if we return undefined, we won't invoke any HTTP call. So this is how to use string, object, and function. And now let's see how to use the options. One of the options is the default value, which will be appear into the UI whenever we have an error response, a loading response, or the HTTP resource. Actually, the HTTP is idle. And we can also have the parse, and I really like this one. We can even use Zod schema, which means that we can make sure that the incoming payload should match the defined schema that we have defined from our UI. If they do not match, we will throw an error. Okay, how can I use that? Well, what I'm doing here into the upper code, we have resource, you name that, you define how to name this kind of variable, equals HTTP resource. And then into your HTML, you can have if resource.isLoading. Please note that this is a signal. As soon as this is true, we have the loading indicator. If resource.error, if this is error, you handle the error. And eventually, of course, we have the value. And you can do something with the value. And the great thing about that is, since they are signals, we can even create a derived state from the incoming value. Okay, so let's try now to answer the questions. Are we done with the loading? Yes, we saw that we have the loading indicator, we have the error handling, and we also are handling correctly the data. But for the last part, I feel that there are some unanswered questions. How can I cancel the previous HTTP calls? And the answer is that the HTTP resource behaves similar to switch map, which means that it cancels the previous unfinished HTTP calls. And how can I debounce the calls? Well, we should debounce the value and not the calls. Unfortunately, we do not have that much time here to go into much details of how to do that. I have a video into my YouTube channel, Code Shots with Fanis, where I'm diving deeper into the HTTP resource and explaining how to debounce the value. Okay, so it seems that we are done with the developer experience. This is much better performance. We have improvement there, and the user experience as well. Awesome. So can we have something more magic? And yeah, we can have the linked signal. And that would be the last one that I would like to present to you today. And I would like to start with a very small example. We have the list of items, which is signal, and we have there item 1, item 2, and item 3. Nice. And then we're using the linked signal where we can derive the count of items from a given source. And now the count of items, of course, will return 3, because this is the length of the source, which is the list of items. And the linked signal returns a writable signal, which means that we can even use the method set to change the value. Someone would say here, you know what, this seems similar to computed, and you are right. The difference here is that the computed returns a non-writable signal compared to linked signal, which returns a writable. Look at a minute. Is this the only difference, that we have non-writable and writable? No. So let's focus a bit more into another notation of linked signal, where what we can see here is that, again, the count of items derives from the list of items, which is our source. As you can see also in line 4, this is our source. And the great thing with this one is that the count of items is now linked with the list of items. And why is this important to have them linked? Think the following, that for any reason we would like now to extend the list of items, which is our source. We have item 1, item 2, item 3, and we would like now to add item 4. At the time that we are changing that, the computation function will be automatically invoked, and the length, of course, will become 4. So this is a short introduction of the linked signal, and now let me give you a very easy to digest example. Let's assume that we have a drop-down. We have the selected item, and below that on the right side, we have the selected item is null. We didn't select anything. We're expanding that, and we can see that we have item 1, item 2, and item 3, and still the selected item is null because we didn't select anything yet. Now we are selecting an item, and we can see that we have this kind of nice green background, and we also have the interpolation which says the selected item is name item 1. Nice, simple thing. And what we have behind the scenes is that we have this list of items, which is a signal, name item 1, name item 2, and name item 3, and the selected item, which is bound with our dropdown. And for the sake of this presentation, I have the list of items with the very first item of this kind of array. And I noticed that I have a typo there. We need a parenthesis. I will fix that later. And let's now think the following. We have the list of items, and now we have an HTTP where we are subscribing. We are making an HTTP call. We get some new items, and we would like these new items to set them into the list of items. What will happen? Well, the problem with this is that the selected item will appear into the interpolation because we didn't clear that imperatively. But the actual selected item is not there because we destroyed the object reference. And this is something that we know when we have to deal with a dropdown is a pain, and we have to find workarounds. So to picture a bit, the problem is that the list of items and the selected item, they are not linked together. And the solution, you know, what the solution would be? The solution is very easy. In this case, we have to link them together, and we have to use the linked signal. And if we do that, the selected item will be linked with the source, which is the list of items. And whenever we have something new into our source, the computation function will be invoked, and the selected item will always have the correct value, either being the selected item, meaning item 1, item 2, or item 3, or null. So having the linked signal, I feel that the developer experience has been improved a lot. And that goes from my side. Thank you a lot for your time and your attention.
Okay, thank you, Fanis. Like, whoa, that was amazing. So much knowledge packed into like, what, 30 minutes? That's really impressive.
Thank you.
Yeah, so now it's time for our Q&A session. So be sure to ask your questions in the chat, and let me have a look here. Okay, we have one. What is the difference between the computed and linked signal? Are there any specific use cases to use computed versus linkedSignal?
This is one of the things that I try to highlight into my presentation. The commuted returns a non-writable signal, whereas the linked signal returns a writable signal. But this is, let's say, the small difference between them. The linked signal, and like what the name implies, is that you are creating a connection. You are creating a connection with your source. And since we have the commutation function, that commutation function will be invoked. And are there any specific use cases? The drop-down that I presented previously is a use case is to digest and use it even into your production system. I hope that answers the question.
Yep, I think so. So let me take a look if there is another one. Okay, seems not. It seems like there is no more questions. So it was so clear, so packed with the knowledge that it seems everything is quite clear. So again, thank you, Fanis, for a great presentation. Thank you for being with us. And I hope to see you at future events.
Definitely. Thanks a lot for having me. It was a great one. And yeah, thanks a lot.
Bye. Okay, so before we move on to our last speaker for today, a quick shout out to one of our community partners, Frontend Nation. They are actually organizing the second edition of their free online frontend conference. It's happening from June 3rd to June the 5th. So mark your calendars and you will find more information in the chat. We'll just put the link there in a moment. All right, so now let me get to our last speaker, Enea Jahollari. Probably all of you know Enea, but in case you don't, he just loves open source. He contributes by code, by creating some amazing content, and he's really active in the social media. So if you would like to stay up to date with cutting edge Angular stuff, I really encourage you to follow this guy. He's also a GDE, so he knows Angular very, very well. And yeah, actually, it's his second time on our camp, so we are really happy to have him back. So hello, Enea. How are you going?
Hello. I'm doing great. How about you?
Yeah, I'm also doing very, very well. Thank you. So I wanted to ask you the same question I asked Fanis, but with a twist this time. So what are your plans for, attending some conferences or meetups in person this year? And also, maybe you could tell us more about the upcoming Angular Connect.
Well, I think I've applied to most of them at this point, like NGDE, NG Poland. Haven't applied yet to NGBE, and probably will make it to Angular Connect. So almost to everything in Europe.
Okay, great to hear that then. And yep, now it's time for your presentation. So the stage is yours.
Thank you. So, well, today's topic is the missing intro of the deferred block. So on this talk, I basically just go into a little bit more details on why do we even need that, or how does it help, and how we, let's say, could do that thing before, what, of course, deferred does now. So, short intro, I'm Enea Jahollari, based in Albania. I'm a software engineer at pushbase.io. I'm also a GD for Angular. I'm a co-creator of ng extension library together with Chao. And what I mostly do is large migrations on Angular, of course, performance improvements, and lately also scalable Angular architectures. Well, let's continue. Loading what matters first, viewport. So let's say we have an application, like a movies application. And if we zoom out, most of the time we can see, for example, the details part, like picture, title, some description, the cast. And of course, below that, we can probably see some recommended movies or let's say related movies. And most of the time, what we see on our browser initially is the viewport, so only the first part. But the way we write code is mostly just show everything in one place. And of course, we also would have the recommended movies, which for the user, they would be out of viewport. And of course, that makes it a great candidate for lazy loading. So to just load it slightly later instead of like initially loaded. So manual lazy loading. In order to lazy load in Angular, we can, let's say, just do normal dynamic imports using import and create them using, let's say, create component or pass them to ng component outlet, which basically uses the same API under the hood. So let's go with view container f.create component. So lazy loading a component. How it looks on code. So let's say we have some movie lists, like those recommendations or recommended results. And in order to lazy load it, what we need to do first is, of course, not load that thing immediately on the template. Otherwise, it becomes, let's say, it would be bundled with the same, let's say, movies page details that movie details page component. And what we do is, instead of loading the component directly, we just create a, let's say, a div element. And of course, we put a template reference to it. And of course, that would, let's say, serve as an anchor. And in order to get that, we just do view child on movie list reference. And what we do there is we say read the view container ref. So we just get the container ref of that element. And in order to lazy load some code, what we can do is, as I said before, is just say import this chunk and then call create component. Of course, there we pass the movie list that we got from the, let's say, dynamic import, and of course, apply some inputs like component ref instance.movies, and we pass the, let's say, the inputs as we did before on the template. And of course, what that will do is create a new chunk when we, let's say, load our page. But sometimes we also need a loading template to show something while that component is, let's say, being loaded. And for that, what we can do is we can say create an ng template, and of course, grab it using view child again. We also need error handling. So if, let's say, the loading fails, we need to show something, and we can use the same logic for the error part. And what we can do is inside, like before we do the import and let's say the component creation, we can first say create embedded view. And there we pass the loading template. And this, of course, will, let's say, load the loading template. And after that, it will load the lazy component. But also what we can do is, of course, render the error template on the catch part. Great. Now let's load the component when it reaches the viewport. And in order to do that, of course, I want to bring to your attention the part that we have a viewport and out of viewport. And in order to know when something reaches viewport, we can use something called intersection observer API, which is, let's say, widely available, as we can see on the baseline banner here. And what we want to do basically is listen if an element reaches viewport, and after that, just unsubscribe, because we already, let's say, get the trigger that the component needs to be loaded. So in order to do that, what we can say is we can say create an observer, like new intersection observer. And then the moment that, let's say, it runs and it, let's say, fetches, or let's say it's getting triggered, what we do is we unobserve. So this, think of it like a take one on ArcGIS operators. And after that, we run some logic when the element is visible in the viewport. And of course, just like subscribe for ArcGIS, we need to call observe and pass an element to it. And this, of course, will initialize observing the element. And what we can do now is we take all the logic that we had before and put it inside that logic part here. So basically now we have observer, intersection observer, and then observer and observe, and then start the observer here. And all the code of, let's say, loading, of creating the loading template, loading the lazy component and the error template, now it's inside that template. So inside that code block. And if we look at the complete code, it looks something like this. It's like too much code, and you need to understand how, view container ref works, how template ref works, how intersection observer works. You need to understand that you also need to unobserve, and of course, also clear the view container before creating something. And of course, all that logic, which is too much if you're just getting started. So basically, we have to connect all this, let's say, arrows ourselves on the template. Like a div for an anchor, we need to connect the loading template, we need to connect the error template. And as I said before, that's too much code. And let's say defer block is the rescue for it. So when it comes to defer, what we can do is, instead of doing all that other stuff, we can say move a list and move a list, and we can say just put it inside the defer block, and that's it. We need loading, of course, and that's it. We just put loading. Second, I need to stop the phone. And of course, after loading, we can also show error when let's say the component loading fails. We also had the case where we need to show something on viewport, and that's where on viewport comes into place. Like it's a trigger for defer blocks, and we can do that using that div. So we can just create that same reference, and when that div comes into the viewport, we basically go and load the component. So here is a before and after. Isn't that great? Well, I think so. So how does it work? Under the hood, what Angular does is basically creates IV instructions, and for the defer components, it basically creates those, let's say, dynamic imports. And of course, loads them based on the, let's say, triggers. So this is a code generated by the Angular compiler. And I have to say that defer blocks only works with Angular standalone components, directives, and pipes. It doesn't work, for example, with normal HTML tags. Defer triggers. Well, defer accepts 3 types of triggers: when, on, and prefetch, and we will go into details for each one of them. So when trigger accepts expression that returns a Boolean. For example, we want to, let's say, load the movie list when the movies are loaded, and we want to show the recommended movies. So based on some, I don't know, flags that is coming from the backend. But also, we have to take into account that defer with when is not the same as if. So here we have defer when movie is loaded and if show recommended. If show recommended, or if movies loaded, let's say, gets changed from movies loaded to false, this component will still show. So take that into account. So we shouldn't use, let's say, defer with when trigger the same as if it was an if, let's say, condition. Okay, so on trigger accepts multiple configurable options, and the first one is idle. And what it does under the hood is basically it calls request idle callback. So when there's nothing happening on the site anymore, like no more asynchronous operations, that's when this defer block will load. Interaction, we can use it with, let's say, basically it will interact to click and key down. So when we click on that placeholder component or image or whatever thing we have inside there, then that's when the app video player will, let's say, be loaded. Or what we can do is we can also pass a reference there. So we can have a button from, let's say, somewhere else in the template and be like, we want to, let's say, load this menu login form when we go and, let's say, click on the login button reference. So we can lazy load some model component or forms when, let's say, we interact with some, let's say, specific buttons or inputs. Immediate is basically immediately after render. So it just same as we had on that let's say, manual lazy loading, where we just say, on after viewing it, just load component and render it. We have a timer. Timer uses set timeout under the hood, so we can just put 100 milliseconds there, or just like normal 1 second. And it will just say, after 1 second, just load it. And then we have hover. And same as, let's say, interaction, it uses mouse enter and focus in. And of course, what we can say is we can just say hover on the placeholder or hover on some element reference that we passed to it. So it can be a button, a div, a span, another component, doesn't matter. As long as the user will hover on it, then that, let's say, video editor component will load. And then we have viewport, and that's exactly the same use case as we had before. So we can either say placeholder, like when this div comes into the viewport, then we load the footer. Or we can also say when the contact form, let's say, comes into the viewport, then we load the footer. This way, we can say the moment that the user is scrolling, before he reaches the footer, which only, for example, can have like just a copyrights div, we can say the moment that it reaches the contact form, then just go and also load the footer, because we know that the user will scroll also below. And that's a great way to, let's say, think about the viewport, for example, or the movie details. So then we have prefetch. Prefetch basically accepts everything that when an on triggers, let's say, happens. And what prefetch does is basically say, just go and load the, let's say, the JavaScript for it, but not the component directly. So we can say prefetch when movie is loaded, prefetch on timer, prefetch on hover, prefetch on interaction. And of course, we can use all options at once, meaning like we can use when movie is loaded, on a timer, or on hover, and prefetch on interaction or on viewport. This is not recommended, but I just showed you there that you can do it. So it's not blocking you from combining multiple things at once. There's more. There's placeholder that has, let's say, its minimum params. Loading has after and minimum, and error, of course, doesn't have any params. But that's deferred for another time. Well, how to break defer? It's easy. You just create a, let's say, normal application like ng-new. You do ng-serve, and you'll see that defer won't be treated the same as, let's say, as we saw here, because by default on Angular, I think v19, we use HMR. And HMR basically kills the defer functionality. Only on development, I have to say. So if you're in development mode, you'll see that defer blocks will be loaded immediately instead of, let's say, playing by the rules of defer block. But when you deploy to production, you will have normal, of course, defer behavior. So basically what will happen, I think, in Angular v20 is that you'll see a warning on your browser console saying that Angular has detected that this application contains defer blocks and the hot module replacement mode is enabled. And of course, all defer block dependencies will be loaded eagerly. So another way to break it is to use the component outside the defer block. If we have the same movie list in the same, let's say, template, and we have an if clause there, and of course we have the defer here, because this movie list is also, let's say, outside the defer block, this thing here will be loaded eagerly. And of course, that breaks the whole idea of defer lazy loading a component. So keep that in mind. So if you don't see, let's say, a component lazy loaded, you probably will have some, let's say, other component outside defer block inside your template. You probably maybe are using a view child or view children, and are taking a reference of that, for example, count component, even though you are lazy loading it on your, let's say, component. And what this does is basically still retains that count component reference. And this will also break your defer. What else? As I said before, defer doesn't work if the component or directive or pipe is not standalone. But you can say that, hey, I have a count component, this standalone. I import it on a module, export it on a module, and then on the app component, I import the count module. that thing basically won't work. So in order for defer to work, you need to import the count component here directly in order for it to, let's say, be lazy loaded. How to optimize? Well, if you use defer inside for loops, you can say, hey, I want to, let's say, defer load the movie card. And then we have a for loop and defer inside of it. And what happens is that for loop for each element will create an embedded view. And of course, because we have the defer block, which also creates its own, let's say, embedded views, now we are creating twice as much. So for each embedded view, we are now creating another one. That's not great. One way to solve this is basically to just move the defer block outside. And what this will do is we'll create one embedded view for the defer block. And of course, how many movies we have on that for loop. And that's how many embedded views it will create. So this is basically the better behavior, I have to say. Well, incremental hydration. I won't talk more about it, but if you want to learn more, basically defer is the building block for incremental hydration. And Michael, who is a CEO at Pushbase, has a talk on incremental hydration in Angular. And I also put the link there for you to just check it out. It's really well explained, and it really goes into, let's say, details and in depth. Highly recommended. Well, that's all, folks. I'm Enea, and let's discuss defer.
All right, Enea, thank you very much for the presentation. That was really interesting to take a look at defer from slightly different angle and also to have a little bit more of a look under the hood. So yeah, now it's time for our Q&A session. So guys, please be sure to ask your questions into the chat. So let's have a look if there is anything already there. Seems not yet. Let's wait another second or two. Some words of appreciation.
Maybe the slides were good.
Yeah, I think so, to be honest. Okay, there is one question from Wojciech Trawiński. How to make a reload when there is an error when using defer?
There's not a way to do that, I think. And that's a good, I think, that would be a great issue on the Angular GitHub.
Okay, so
I never had issues, to be honest.
Yeah, but it could happen potentially, right? So Wojciech, you are welcome to open an issue or maybe even a PR. So let's get to the next one. When using defer, it has some impact or bad side effect with SSR?
Well, if you use defer without the hydrate, let's say, trigger, what you're doing is basically defer loading that component, and it won't load on the SSR. But if you use the hydrate trigger, basically that component will also load on the server side, and you'll have, let's say, a better story with it on the client. So I'd say use defer without hydrate if you only need to, let's say, defer load something. But if not, then probably it's not good to use it, because if you use it, for example, on things that are basically on your initial viewport, then you probably may cause some CLS because you're loading content late, even though you need to load it immediately.
All right. Thank you for that. And one more, can we pass functions as param?
Well, I don't get that question. You mean function? We can call them inside the when or on the on trigger, but we cannot say conditional when or on. We can just use both, maybe.
Mm-hmm. So I guess that was the question. So yeah, hopefully you answered it. And that would be it. That's the end of our Q&A session. So again, Enea, thank you very much for joining us today. We were really happy to have you with us. And
happy to be here.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And take care and see you at some future events. Bye.
See you. Bye-bye.
All right, so that's all we had for today. But at this point, I would also like to remind you that we are always open to your contribution. So if you would like to start writing for Angular Love blog, that's just amazing. We'll post a link in the chat so you can fill in the form and join our bloggers team. And thanks again for being part of our Angular Love community and also for your great attendance today. Our next event will be held online on the 12th of June at 6 p.m., featuring 3 guests, Dmitro Mezański, Alan Shatord, and Damian Maduzia. Until then, be sure to follow us on social media to stay updated and stay curious, keep coding, and see you soon. Bye.